establish a committee when the issues are too complex or numerous to be handled by the full board. But make sure that every time your committee makes a decision, or actually they have a recommendation, it comes back to the full board because it needs to be approved. Okay, now the board development thing doesn't, but you know what I'm saying? If you have a committee, make sure you don't have all these autonomous little decision-making entities going around. So that's to establish the committees. For ongoing major activities, establish permanent committees. And you can see underneath for types of committees here. Typically, these are what we call potential or standing committees. The typical 3 standing committees is financial, board development, and executive committee, which is controversial. Okay, not every organization has an executive committee, particularly small organizations. In fact, what's interesting to me, I found really tiny organizations sometimes need an executive committee because the ED is pretty much by him or herself. So they want 2 or 3 people that they can talk to and can lift up the phone and say, quick, can you have coffee with me? I've got to deal with this issue, all right? So ironically, for a small organization, executive committee and this is something that the ED would normally be making, these are decisions an ED would normally be making in a large organization on his or her own, but in a tiny organization would really like some other ideas to bounce off, because in a larger organization, they have a staff of 5 or 6 department heads they can talk to. So you're really serving as kind of a sounding board for an ED when you have an executive committee in a tiny organization. Okay, but executive committee decisions, when they're made like policy decisions, always have to come back for the board for approval. Because one of the reasons an executive committee gets controversial is the executive committee starts making the decisions the board should be making. Okay? And so you go to a board meeting and say, why am I bothering? The decisions have already been made. So that's where you have to be careful about an executive committee. Okay. Potential ad hoc committees, task forces, things like that. You can read. These are all potential ones. People used to have, sometimes you may have a standing committee of fund development. That's fine. You can move things up. As long as you have something to do, as long as these committees have something to do, then you just keep them operating. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm really surprised to see that those are temporary committees. Most of the boards that I sit on or have sat on, a lot of these are regular committees, permanent committees, and you're looking at them as ad hoc.
You know, there are some, it varies from agency to agency. There are some of these committees down here can be moved up to what I call potential standing or committees. For example, if you're on if you're on a large organization board, my guess is that something like a fund development committee will always be in existence because you've got capital campaigns, you've got lots of things. That's no longer a temporary committee. Okay. Events committee, you may have a standing events committee because you have a big event every year. But you see that the criteria always is, if this committee has an ongoing function that's going to carry over the whole year, then you want it as an ongoing committee. But I would only be writing in the bylaws the ones that I wanted to make sure we always have. That would be the only qualifier I would be. Okay. All right. Quick criteria, 5 elements of effective committees. You all know these. A good committee chair. Now, so how do people get to become committee chairs in your agencies? Unfortunately, it's, well, who's willing? Right. And you're sitting there going, oh no, look who raised their hand. To the extent that you can have committee chairs appointed by your board chair and your ED in consultation with each other, and have that as a policy, you will be far superior in the long run, okay? To the extent that you can either have a small group appoint committee chairs, if you can do that, it would be great. So that you aren't stuck with saying who will volunteer to be this committee chair. Okay, you think about it ahead strategically, all right? Even if you want to ask who will volunteer, if I were you, I would have already found somebody who said they'd volunteer before I asked that statement, okay? Makes sense? Because I know we've all been in that situation, okay. Written committee charters. Every committee that meets say what's our goal, what's our purpose, and what's our outcome. That's all you have to do, but it's great clear. How many of you have been in committees you wondered, why am I here and what are we doing? Right. nor did we accomplish anything. A great question for your committees is, what are we going to accomplish either at the end of this meeting or at the end of this year? Okay, and each committee should have those tasks. Meetings start with objectives. The goal of this committee, Sherry will help you on objectives, okay? You know, the objective of this committee at the end of this meeting is X. Great. Members are thoughtfully appointed. If you have enough folks there, other than just who's available and who has the time. And here, too, the beauty of a committee, too, is this is where you put your outsiders. This is where you get people from the community. This is where you get people that you want to check out to see if they're going to be good board members. Put them on these committees. It's a great way to, and by the way, people feel attached to your organization if they can get around your mission, if they think they know what it's doing. Get them on these, set up some, get them on these committees. Much greater chance of getting them on as board members. It's a wonderful vehicle for that. Okay. Committee members have terms too. Okay. Now, you may have a fund development committee you don't want terms, because you may have 2 or 3 great. So selectively used committee members have terms. Board development nominations, I recommend terms. All right, because if you have the same group picking the same people. But on some other committees, you know, you may have some folks you clearly want to keep on that committee for life. You know, they're now on the advisory board and everything. Okay, questions? Okay. All right. The other effectiveness factor was boards and committee meetings are run well, start on time, give members a chance to engage in issues and ensure all voices are heard. This one usually scores pretty high. Most people, it's interesting when I've done this survey before, you know, the biggest complaints about meetings have been, board meetings, have been that they're boring, have been we never deal with anything relevant, and we just go on and on. So there's not really good time management. So there's a way to buff up your meetings and to just take all 3 of those and do the exact opposite, you know. Well, what I've discovered are too many board meetings focus exclusively on reports. Let's just update you on this. Let's give you information on that. You just gotta get tired of hearing the ED or the board chair talk. And it's just talk, talk, talk. So I have 3 tips for improving your board meetings, okay? 1 is decide something at every meeting. In fact, every committee you sit on, make sure that one thing is decided at every meeting. And if you're not deciding one thing at every meeting, don't have it. Let's say you're meeting every month on your board and you can't come up with one thing that your board can decide at every meeting. Go to every other month, because you're wasting people's time. Okay? Number 2, make sure everyone says at least one thing. Look around on your board. Does everyone say at least one thing at your board meeting? Okay, so if they don't, what can you do? Huh? Absolutely. Ask them. You know, you as a member of the board, you as the ED, you as a chair can say, Sam, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. You haven't said anything. Or just, yeah, I'd like to hear what you think. But at the end of the meeting, if you walk out and you haven't had a board member say anything, something's wrong with your meetings. Okay? Tip number 3, each board meeting has a meaty issue. Something you can chew on. Something that's either strategic, policy, controversial, whatever. But people feel like they were able to engage on something. You know, I mean, it was relevant. They walked out and said, gee, I feel good. I was able to make a contribution. So say, do I have a meaty issue there? I added something here too, and encourage disagreement. I think we're afraid of disagreements in our boards. We all want to be nice to everybody. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. You don't encourage people being nasty, but encourage some disagreement. And I have something called my 5-finger consensus. I think